Saad, did you start recording?
Yes.
All right. Today is Wednesday, October 24th, 2018. This is the Kubernetes CSI workgroup. And I guess we can go ahead and start with an update from Jordan.
Hey. So I am trying to drive some progress on the node self-labeling issue, which is this long-lived effort to make it safer for kubelets to label themselves without letting them draw workloads from other nodes that are supposed to be partitioned from them. So labels are used for lots of things. Security boundaries, topology, all sorts of things. And so we want to figure out how we're going to decide which labels a kubelet is allowed to set. And we'd like to do that in this release so that the CSI topology behavior can move forward. So we've talked about a few different approaches. One is just a fixed set of sort of known labels. We're going to have to do that to some extent for backwards compatibility with the labels the kubelet already sets. Another proposal was a fixed set of known prefixes. So if we picked a few prefixes that kubelets were allowed to control, and so some good candidates might be like kubelet.kubernetes.io/whatever. Or topology.kubernetes.io/whatever. And then it would be clear to administrators who were wanting to partition nodes for security reasons that they would need to use other labels, that everything under these label namespaces would be under the control of the kubelet and couldn't be relied on to isolate nodes from each other for security purposes. So this idea had some promise. I think it works well for things that are Kubernetes aware and are happy kind of placing labels within these namespaces. For CSI drivers, however, the wrinkle was that not all CSI drivers will be Kubernetes aware. And the way that CSI drivers communicate topology is by returning these topology labels, which are very similar to Kubernetes labels, but are not exactly the same. And the guidance and documentation around them is that CSI drivers namespace them to their own company, right? So it would be like acme.com/zone or acme.com/rack or whatever their topology was. And so from an authorization perspective, we don't know what arbitrary CSI drivers are going to be installed and what arbitrary topology labels they're going to want to make use of. And so we've kind of gone around and around trying to figure out whether we have a way to configure this or something the cluster admin has to do to kind of say, here are the drivers I have and the topology labels they're going to want to use. We keep coming back to this idea of well-known prefixes, though, and it would be really great if we could let CSI drivers use arbitrary topology labels, but then when they are recorded as Kubernetes labels, if they still fell under one of these well-known prefixes. So an idea that we had was that CSI topology labels could be transformed into Kubernetes labels. So what this would look like, if a CSI driver returned a topology label of zone, then the kubelet would prefix that with topology.kubernetes.io. If a CSI driver returned a topology label that was namespaced to them, then the kubelet would append the topology.kubernetes.io namespace. Looking at the CSI spec, there's enough room in the label to do this. So CSI labels can be 63 characters, have a namespace of 63 characters, and Kubernetes labels can have a namespace of 253 characters. So we have more space to play with. And what this would do is it would let us avoid any configuration. It would let CSI drivers report any labels they wanted to use. It would identify all of the labels on the node object related to the CSI topology as topology labels, which I think has benefit, actually. And the information that we need to transform back and forth is present. So the components that are involved are the kubelet, the storage class, and the CSI provisioner. And so those are the three components that would be looking at. Well, actually, it's just the kubelet and the CSI provisioner that would need to do this transformation. Everything else, storage class, persistent volumes, the scheduler, everything else would just deal with Kubernetes labels. So this is, I'm putting together the document update to the labeling proposal, but I wanted to kind of float that here and get people's thoughts, reactions. I recognize this is a little gross, but it's also gross to require configuration for everything. And it's also gross to not let things like CSI make use of labels for topology. So I'm hopeful that this is the least gross thing that we can do that lets everybody actually get their work done. So ideas, reactions, thoughts?
I think this will work pretty well. The only possible concern is that if there was something in the CSI spec limiting the length, that would make it difficult to just append. But I think you said the length limits we have on the keys are okay.
Yeah, CSI is 63 character namespace, and Kubernetes allows 253. So that gives us room to append the topology namespace, even if a CSI driver uses the maximum length. One thing that I do like about this is that it makes it clear when you're looking at a node which labels are topology related. One of the concerns that I had about sort of arbitrary components contributing arbitrary labels is that the labels on a node would become incoherent, and some people would like have nice conventions and some people wouldn't, and this kind of namespacing a label for its purpose is something that I think is generally good to do, even apart from the authorization aspects.
Yeah, I think this is not the worst approach. The things that I wanted when I was looking at this was somehow be able to have the same set of label keys across volume plugins, whether they're CSI or other types of volume plugins for a given company, and I think we can still do that with this. Mm-hmm. And it'll be opaque to the CSI driver, and it'll add in, this is a topology label as explicit. And then as far as end users are concerned, they're going to operate on the full label with the topology as part of it. I think it's workable.
Okay. Okay. Well, I will get the document finished up, and I have some examples of how CSI would use it, and I'm trying to come up with some examples of other things that are happening on the nodes that are wanting to make use of labels. And so I'll get that sent out. Is SIG storage the right place to do that? Is everyone on the CSI work group on SIG storage as well? Or?
Yeah, they should be.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks for letting me jump in.
Thank you. So Deep and Chang, let's keep an eye on that, and whenever it gets ratified, we can go ahead and make the changes on our side. So we should track this as an item for before 1.0.
I had one question on the first example of the CSI rack. So is there any way that this could start colliding between drivers, or is it?
So if you look at the
It's not.
the line below, it ends up being acme.com.topology.kubernetes.io. So essentially, we're taking whatever the prefix is that's specified by the volume plugin, which ostensibly should not collide because it's your own domain. And then it's getting suffixed with topology.kubernetes.io. So it shouldn't be any less or any more likely to collide than the existing proposal.
Okay. Sounds good.
Cool.
Yeah, the CSI spec says that the prefix is optional, but if collision is a concern, then you should be namespacing it
Right.
to your company or the domain that you control.
Yep. Sounds good. When do you think you'll have the proposal ready by?
I am finishing it up, and I will check it in probably this afternoon.
Okay, cool. So I guess we can implement it for this cycle. All right, thank you. Back to you, Michelle. Michelle, are you on mute?
Oops. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
All right, let's skip down to the 112 items. So first, Luis, were you able to make a cut for liveness probe?
Absolutely, and the container is ready.
All right, so
I need to do is I have to update the doc page with all the versions. I'm gonna do that now.
okay. Let's see. So this is done. Or this is complete. All right. Okay. And next is Patrick on updating the E2E tests. I guess Patrick.
Yeah, I'm here. I just had to find the unmute button. If it's a button on the screen, it's a bit harder to find. I think I did that a while ago already, at least for the host path driver. I was just trying to figure out whether I also did it for the YAML file with the GCE PD test. I honestly don't remember.
Okay, but the host path has been updated.
Yep.
All right, this has been done. Need to verify. Okay. All right, and then and what's the status on the cherry pick?
For
were we able to cherry pick the 0.4 updates to 112?
I've not tried. I didn't know that we were planning to do that. I missed that. No, I still need to do that. Is there a specific process for doing a cherry pick? Or just manual pull request?
There's a script in Kubernetes called hack cherry pick or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, you just give the PR name and it'll automatically create the PR for you.
So real quick, looking at the host path test, it looks like it's using the 0.40 sidecar containers. I know we've had a few updates, and we have like 0.41 and possibly a 4.2. I don't think there's a 4.2. But should we update those before we cherry pick?
Can you cherry pick two pull requests?
You can, yes.
Okay.
So maybe we should cherry pick both. I think we should be on the latest.
Yeah, and I just looked at the GCE PD YAML file. It's still on 0.2, so I also need to update that.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm actually planning on removing all the PD driver setups soon. So I don't know if we want to spend effort updating the PD side yet.
So the PD side just uses the manifest that's already part of the deployment, I think, for in the external GCE PD repo.
No, there's a copy. There's a copy in the end-to-end.
Okay. Got it.
And it's a combination of manifest and custom code which loads the entities from the YAML file.
Got it.
This is further down in my status report where I have this pull request open, where I have a bit more complete YAML file support that I'm discussing with Michelle. So if your current deployment, for example, has multiple entities in the same file, you can't directly load it with the current code in the end-to-end framework.
So what I want is some way that we actually verify this end-to-end with the real driver. I understand that we're going to be pulling out the GCE PD end-to-end tests. Michelle, what is the timeline for that?
I'm hoping to be able to do it by this week.
Okay. So then it might not be worth it.
What does that mean, pulling it out? You're not going to have it anymore?
Right.
We're going to pull it out and run it as part of the PD repo CI.
I see. So
instead of being in core Kubernetes.
So in core Kubernetes, then we would need a more realistic driver than host path, right?
Yes, ideally.
Okay, so maybe the one I'm working on can be that driver.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Which one is the more realistic one?
It's the you can see there's a link below from Monday. I described what it is. It's based on NFS and it provides block and file.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're already planning on it, Luis, but I think we're gonna need a test for a driver with topology capability also. I don't know if that driver is going to be able to support that.
That's something we can discuss.
Okay.
I'm not very familiar to the truth about topology, but that's something we can add.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's all open source, so if you want to add it to it, then you can add it to it. So.
Yeah. Also to be clear, like we still plan on running the E2E tests against the PD driver. It's just not going to be reported with the current entry Kubernetes.
So part of the thing is that the current GCE PD driver is actually exercising a lot of code paths, which the host path driver doesn't. If we remove it and we don't have a fully functional end-to-end test on the Kubernetes side, I feel like we may end up with more regressions more often. Can we leave the test in place until we have a viable replacement? I would rather that than have a delayed signal. What is the drawback of leaving it in place?
The main drawback is that we're not actually testing the PD driver deployment the same way that we actually recommend on the repo.
Yep. So that's fair. I think we should go forward with having CI on the PD repo. That will exercise the deployment as we intend to, but let's leave the existing Kubernetes end-to-end test as is. It may not be using the correct deployment to test the CSI driver, but what it will do is test exercise paths like topology that we don't have good coverage on.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The main headache is that whenever we want to update the deployment, now we have to kind of maintain 2 different sets of manifest files.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I
let-
think we can live with that at least until we have CSI migration turned on by
Mhm.
default, in which case
Right.
then we will definitely be exercising the PD
Yep,
driver.
that's true. Okay, so let's do that. What that means is, Patrick, can you go ahead and update the GCPD driver to use the latest 0.4x sidecar containers?
Yeah, okay.
Great. And then once you're done with that, also update the host path and then cherry pick both back to 12, the 12 branch. All right, thank you.
All right. Let's see. Do we have a status on the snapshots E2E tests?
So my coworker is working on that. But look, I see that he actually updated the image, but he only updated that one for the CSS snapshotter, but not for the others. So he should update all of them to 0.1.
Is this going to conflict with the work that Patrick's doing?
So I need to check that. I need to take a look and see if Patrick is actually changing the same file. Is this one under the storage CSI underscore objects.go?
Yes,
I'm the same file.
Yes.
Probably then maybe. So you're almost done, right?
I have a pull request open, and I was discussing it with Michelle, and we were not quite sure whether we want to go ahead with that approach of renaming drivers and renaming global entities. That's further down, but let's talk about it now. It's a general concern that Michelle has, and it's valid. If we have per test entities, we are basically not testing the same way as in a real cluster, because each test gets its own version, genuine, pristine, or whatever we want to call it, instance of rules of a driver, and nothing else uses that driver at the same time, which is good for test isolation. But it's not stressing the driver in the same way. I think that's the point that Michelle brought up most recently. Unfortunately, this is what we can currently implement. The pull request is ready. What Michelle would like to see is to have drivers getting deployed globally before any test runs that needs them, but that can't be implemented with the framework as it exists now. We kind of do it in a hacky way for this one registrar rule, but it's really hacky because it never deletes the rule. It doesn't update the rule if it already exists. So you might run against a cluster that has a wrong version of the rule. It has all kinds of drawbacks. The underlying problem is that basically the test suite gets brought up before Ginkgo decides what tests it runs. So there is no good way to say, okay, I know that I'm going to run these tests and they need this kind of setup, and so now I'm going to do the setup thing. Is
it possible to like bring up the driver on the first time and then detect if the driver's already up?
You can try, but then you need to communicate between different tests that potentially run in different processes. So it's not easy. I don't have a readily available answer of how to do it. That's why
we can probably simplify some assumptions. Like I don't think we support, or at least we don't use multiple test binaries running at the same time.
Ginkgo does that if you do a parallel test run. It's whenever you run Ginkgo in parallel mode, it does run multiple binaries.
Or at least
same binary, multiple processes.
Or can it at least just, we can use the API server to sort of serialize some of this? Because you can only create an object, one object with the same name.
You could, yes, that would be possible. You basically need to communicate that this entity has been created, but then we still have a question of under which name do we create it? Which name do we pick such that it doesn't conflict with what the cluster has been used before, what has been installed by the user of a cluster before?
I
if
think
we,
we can treat E2E clusters as like sort of independent entities. I don't think we should have a requirement that like users can use the E2E cluster for anything else other than running the E2E tests.
I'm not. That's a new requirement. At least I have not heard that before.
At least in our CI, like we don't
Yeah,
use
but
the
yeah,
E2E clusters for anything else.
but this is also the Kubernetes conformance suite, and people deploy that on arbitrary clusters via Sonoboy. So now you're running tests that potentially break their production installation. That's something that I would run past for SIG testing if that's really something that they would agree to.
Yeah, because I think that the idea that you might be running a test against a cluster where someone also has a driver installed, I'm not sure if, I mean, we can always we could reserve a prefix for all our tests, for all the drivers we deploy through
Okay.
tests. We could do something like that.
Yeah. Then you end up with a situation where you still need to do renaming.
No, just have the deployment specs use that defined
Yeah.
prefix that we say.
Okay. Well, but that's breaking this one goal that we had, that you can take the upstream, or well, at least it was a desirable goal, that we can take the driver registrar RBAC YAML file and just drop it verbatim into the end-to-end testing without any manual editing, and run the tests, knowing that we exactly test what is the upstream definition of the roles. Now, with that need to modify the YAML file, we have at least some manual steps. It's not a deal breaker. It's doable, but overall, my position still is, as I said in this pull request, it currently works. It does the renaming. I'd rather have that merged and then have further discussion of how we can move towards a global installation of the drivers after the fact, because then everyone else can start using these manifest files, and we don't have this permanent risk of conflicts between different pull requests that are currently trying to enhance the testing. Does that make sense?
I think I'll need to think about it because it's a fairly large piece of code that we're adding to this framework that I think may not really be necessary.
What is the alternative? Having YAML files where you have one entity and custom code that creates the items? Because then you diverge even further from the upstream recommended deployment. Currently, all the RBAC files are basically multiple entities in one, and you can't just load them. You basically need to do manual editing. You can't do it. You can't even do a diff anymore. It's not just renaming some fields. You also have to split up the files to use it with the current code.
What I'm worried is that there might not be like a single way to rename these deployment specs, because CSI drivers can have any number of arbitrary arguments.
That's why there's a custom callback. The driver-specific renaming is done by a function that must be provided by the test that does the deployment, or that triggers the deployment.
So I think the main challenge there is that now every single CSI driver needs to implement this callback, and they need to, and we basically have to include every single CSI driver in tree, which is something that I want to avoid.
If people don't want the renaming, they just don't do it, and they can run the test serially. Then you don't get driver renaming, but you still get the rest of the entities properly namespaced and renamed. So this renaming that you are worried about, I think, is optional, but people have to be aware of the consequences.
So the long-term goal here is that we want to be able to run multiple CSI drivers in end-to-end tests and run them parallelly?
No, the long-term goal is to install the driver only once and run multiple tests against the same deployment.
I
But that's
see.
just not, that's further down the road, and it's not currently possible without someone coming up with a good plan of how to achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
And the current situation is that we have code which renames things so that you can run multiple tests against different deployments of the same driver under different names.
And your suggestion, sorry, I missed the beginning part of this conversation. Your suggestion is to take that code and make it more generic for new drivers?
It's already usable by other drivers.
Well, okay.
What I'm suggesting is that we take it, we rip out, well, the most advantage that I actually see in it is that it no longer requires custom code to do the deployment. Right now, the situation is that there is some code which can load one entity from one YAML file, and then you need to use the client Go API to actually create the entity. So you still write, your deployment is still a combination of manually written Go code and a YAML file. With my pull request, you just give a list of YAML files to one function, and it does both at the same time. It loads the entities, it renames, and it creates. And it also takes care of deleting the entities again. So the test-specific code considerably gets less.
Mm-hmm. What's your concern, Michelle?
The main concern is that like this is sort of not really the moving towards the end goal that we want.
I think it is. I think this loading and creating is definitely what we want.
Yeah, I think loading and creating from manifest is what we want, but I'm not sure if patching everything to have unique names.
But then we can. This is the part that we can take out again if once we find out that once we have an alternative.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like we're in agreement that loading manifests is required, but patching is potentially optional. So can we leave it in for now and then pull it out once it's no longer required?
That would be my proposal. Yeah.
Any drawbacks to that approach, Michelle?
I can't really think of any major drawbacks other than we might start depending on this behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And it might mask other issues that drivers might have.
Yep.
But we already have that. That's the current situation. Currently, the renaming is done basically in the custom code that deploys without using manifest. So it doesn't change the current status. We currently deploy once per test under different names.
Mm-hmm. So ideally, we should fast track moving towards deploying using just the manifests so that we can get away from this as soon as possible and get a healthier signal. How difficult would it be to depend solely on the manifests?
Well, just loading from manifests is that works. So what you mean is deploying once.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, we need to ask SIG testing whether they think that this is accepted, that this is an acceptable assumption that we can just. I hesitated to call it pollute the cluster, but the end result is that we run the test and we leave artifacts behind in the cluster because we don't really know when to clean up, or we might override things that have been in the cluster before. Mm-hmm. Whether that is acceptable for SIG testing, that's a conceptual question. And then there are technical questions of how to do that when we have parallel test runs.
Okay. I think that's worth investigating. Patrick, would you be interested in talking to SIG testing and getting their philosophy on this?
I'm interested, but I'm running out of time. I've already spent too much time on upstream Kubernetes work recently.
That's fair.
Need to get some other things done first.
So what we'll do is we'll try to find someone to work on, focus on figuring out how we can do a single deployment with manifests, see if we can get sign off from test. And then once we have that, then we can move away from the patching approach. But for the time being, I think it makes sense to leave the patching as is until we have a viable alternative.
At least right now, though, in our tests, we only have one test.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we're even running multiple tests against a single driver in parallel.
Well, we do that when you do also run the attach tests. It uses the same host path deployment method.
Yeah, I'm changing that. I will use a mock driver that can be configured with driver name. So each CSI driver will look like a different CSI driver, but it will be still mock.
Yeah.
And I want to reuse that for the workload testing. But I don't want to install like 10 different mock drivers during the cluster or during the test startup. This looks like too much.
Yeah, the problem that you're trying to solve is already solved with my pull request. We can still do the change with switching to mock if you want, but part of my pull request is that I remove that serial tag from the tests because the deployment now is properly giving you one host path driver per test run. Or per variant.
Okay.
I think that's fine for the short term. Let's unblock ourselves and get the test running. So we already have a PR available that'll do that, which is doing the patching. And then let's find someone to work on figuring out how to do a single deployment per test run. And once we have that, then we can potentially remove the patching approach and get a more realistic test run.
I need to bring up one other issue, a new issue that I just found today, and that is that the host path CSI test actually no longer ran when I tried it manually. This recent pull request that refactored the testing, I suspect that it caused it. I just didn't have time to investigate. I filed an issue at 70185. What confuses me a bit is that in the CI run that I triggered later, I saw results for the host path CSI tests. So either it was already fixed again or it was configured differently. I don't know. But it may or may not be in a healthy state at the moment.
Okay. Let me, I'll take a look at the that issue while you guys carry on. So can we say plan of action is let's get the test running as soon as possible and keep them running, and in the meantime work to improve the deployment process?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. So we will need to find an owner for someone to figure out the single deployment.
All right, let's see, moving on. Let's see, Cheng, do you have a status on the topology tests?
No updates right now. Just working on it.
All right. And let's see, I guess, Jan, you already sort of gave an update on the workload tests.
Yeah.
Are you still blocked by this issue?
Yeah, I need to. I need Luis to merge it, and he disappeared. So I pinged him on Slack.
All right.
So going back to the snapshot test, it's not completely dependent on Patrick's work, right? So do we want to wait until Patrick's done, or?
Well, perhaps check whether it conflicts.
I look at it. So you basically change the whole thing. So the snapshot test just using whatever is there right now. You basically I see that you added some YAML.
So if you didn't modify CSI object, then we don't conflict. But I don't know.
Yeah, I don't see any conflict with. But after yours is merged, of course, I think we need to use your way to do this test, right? Because right now this is using the existing way. So the images are.
Do the tests actually need to be modified, or my understanding is this is infrastructure level change, right? It shouldn't affect individual tests.
But I think I look at his PR, Patrick's PR. Actually, this CSI underscore object doesn't have much anymore. I think you removed a lot of things from here, and all the images are in a new file now. So right now, this snapshot PR is based on the existing code. So all the images are in this CSI underscore objects. So I don't know. So what do you think? Should we just update this one, update all the images in this current way, or do we want to wait until Patrick's done?
Patrick, how close are you to merging?
I think I'm ready.
Okay, so maybe let's get Patrick's PR in and then rebase on top of that.
Yeah, sure. I think then we at that time we'll just need to change it a little bit because I think the way the code
the patterns will be a little bit different.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can wait. Yeah.
Michelle, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'll spend some more time reviewing Patrick's change today.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
There are some to-do in the code. Whether that should be addressed right away or late in a cleanup pull request later, both is fine. I have time tomorrow. I can do further fix-ups to that pull request to get it clean. But whether that's blocking or pull request, that I leave that to Michelle.
Okay, sounds good. I'm taking a look at your issue 70185. So it looks like the host path tests continue to run as part of CI without issue, and they look like they're currently green. I guess it sounds like the issue is when you run it locally, the command that you used to use for executing it no longer works. Is that correct?
Well, it does run the tests, but then the tests does some checking and it skips. So some precondition is getting checked and the test doesn't actually execute when I invoke it locally.
Got it.
I don't know what this error message means about dynamic PV not supported. I haven't actually. Well, I noticed that 5 minutes before I had to jump into a car and drive. So I don't know anything about the failure. I just noticed.
Yeah, it's probably related because I think the change was it was adding new. I think it was adding new tests to be used in CSI or no, it was what was it doing? It was basically merging common code paths together, and I think one of the checks was skipping host path for dynamic provisioning tests, but I think it was meant for the in-tree host path and not the CSI host path driver.
Got it. Okay, so that needs to be fixed.
Yeah. Do you know if, let's see. Okay, I'll make sure that the proper owner is looking at it.
Cool.
All right, so that's all of the 112 items. Let's move up to the Q4 tasks for GA. All right. So I guess, let's see, moving the volume attachment objects to V1. We have been having discussions with Jordan on this. I think as of this morning, we have a clear path forward.
Yeah, it
And
looks like most of the work is going to end up being on the inline volume side, so I think we should be clear to go here.
yeah.
So the on his end, he's gonna do the changes that would allow us to keep moving.
I think it's giving us the list of changes that he wants us to add to the CSI inline PRs. It's a considerable amount of work. I'm not sure if he's going to help us actually implement it. It sounds like it might be on us. So I would say let's prioritize all these CSI GA tasks and then focus on getting inline in last.
Okay. But so doesn't that mean that inline kind of moved up the ladder now? Because if his recommendations are not in, even if the actual inline is not implemented, we still have to do his recommendations, right?
No, I think it's when we add inline, we have to make sure the validation on the inline will work.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I think this is no longer blocked on the inline work.
Okay. Maybe, okay. It might be worth it to kind of clear that up, but I had a different
yeah, send a
sense.
message to Jordan just to double check, but that was my understanding as well.
Yep. Let's see. I guess I can move this to yellow, maybe. All right.
Is yellow more or less green than orange?
It's less. Wait, it's more green than orange.
Okay.
Nice.
Because orange is closer to red.
I'll buy it.
All right. Let's see. Device plugin registration. Vlad, do you have an update here?
So yeah, I've been talking to Renault. So I pinged them yesterday, and he updated what he called the umbrella PR, which has a list of tasks that need to be done. So he updated the 113 task to show that GA is one of the goals. So that's progress. I'm going to follow up again with him because there is an actual part of what needs to be done is actual work, because some of the items is, hey, how many plugins are implemented with CSI, et cetera. So I guess it's building up a case to present to whomever owns that area so he can move to GA. So I'll support him on that. But also I'll follow up for whatever else he needs.
All right, great, sounds good. All right, and then sort of related, have you had a chance to look at this kubelet plugin deregistration?
Yes, I have. I created a PR, but there's another PR in flight. I'll put the PR here from some folks from Pivotal that have been contributing, and they did some interesting refactoring that I wanted to wait, because there is an issue in the code, the registration code as it stands right now, because it's using a package level variable. There's possibility for racing. I have not proven that yet, but if you look at the code, you could see that it may be kind of unsafe, but the PR that the Pivotal folks are working on kind of clear that up. So I kind of want to wait for that before I do the plugin registration, deregistration mechanism. If they're taking too long, I'll just go ahead and put it in there, and then we can refactor later.
All right, sounds good. All right, and CRD installation. Saad, do you have an update on that?
Yes, I have a work in progress PR out. I'm using, I created a symlink from the add-on directory to the location where the CRDs are. I think it should be kosher, but I'll have to run it by the reviewers to make sure they're okay with it. I don't want to have two different sources of truth for the CRD files. So I want to leave the CRD files under staging, CSI API, and then I'm calling the folder manifest. So take a look at that. I'm testing it right now to make sure it actually works and that the symlinks don't cause issues, but that should be it.
All right. Great. Thanks for the updates. All right. And topology support.
Yep. So the first PR has been reviewed again by Cheng, and he had some minor feedback. So I addressed those comments, and that's in. So basically, I think at this point, Cheng said he's pretty happy with the PR and should be a matter of just merging it. So the first one should be done pretty soon. For the second one, nice. I was curious if the like where we want to keep this admission webhook code, should it go under Kubernetes CSI API? Like that's where I'll start submitting PRs. I was thinking.
Oh, interesting. Would we potentially need a new repo for this?
Well, there's like Kubernetes CSI API where the CRDs live. So should the
I see.
should the admission webhook live with the CRDs?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So I'll open a PR against that.
Yeah, so you just modify the staging directory and then it'll automatically get synced once it's merged.
Can you repeat that? I didn't follow.
The CSI API, in order to make changes, you make changes inside the Kubernetes repo. Inside the Kubernetes repo, there's a staging directory, which has CSI API underneath it. So if you make any changes there, once they get merged, they'll automatically get synced to Kubernetes/CSI API.
Aha, okay. So that was a bit I was missing. Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Cool.
All right. And moving the CSI driver and CSI node info objects from alpha to beta, this depends on the CRD installation. Were we able to resolve Jordan's concerns?
Jan, do you know?
I think that's what we've been talking about, I think.
We've been talking about the inline volume stuff. I'm unsure if these objects have a similar issue or not.
Yes and no. If you have CRD installed and CSI driver and you downgrade, then I'm not sure that all the volumes survive that. But during the downgrade, you don't delete the CRD, so it's still there, so it should be safe.
Okay.
I think it might be fair to say that if there's a CSI driver that depends on this behavior, the DCRDs, you can only use it with a version of Kubernetes that has these CRDs enabled.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a driver that uses it and then you downgrade to a version that doesn't have the CRD, then you need to not use that driver.
Yeah, probably.
All right.
Okay.
I'm getting kicked out of the room, but you can continue. I'll keep my laptop on.
Okay. I can carry on from here. So next item is moving CSI to 1.0. There are no updates here other than, yeah, I think that's it. No updates on that. Next item is moving CSI RBAC role definitions from Kubernetes to external repo. Is Patrick still on the line?
No.
Okay, so it looks like he dropped off. It doesn't look like that was too much additional work. Looking at the next item in the list. Let me pull it up on my computer. I believe we had the driver registrar breaking it into multiple items. That Luis also stepped out, so can't get an update on that. And Patrick had a flaky host path end-to-end test that he was tracking down. It looks like he is waiting for another PR to merge to get a better understanding of what the root cause might be. And that's it. I think that's all that we have for this meeting. Let's reconvene on Friday.
Yeah, just a reminder, I want to have a meeting about CSI driver update.
Okay.
And I distributed the Doodle poll. I think most people already responded. I wanted David. David's not here. Okay, so that's it.
Cool. I'll share the link with David. All right. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.